point is that we expect that to happen, and that's great. So the recording has just come on, so everyone's going to miss the first 10 minutes of the webinar. So there you go. I don't know what's happened with
Zoom's
it.
really having a day of it this morning.
It's having me over. That's for certain. It's absolutely having me over. Anyways, let's move on to the second question before anything else happens. Okay. So how do you balance then setting ambitious goals that stretch your team versus realistic targets that maintain motivation?
That for me is the key to all of this, Howard. It's a great question. It's that piece about maintaining motivation and being realistic. So, I'm all for ambition, but if you're setting a 25% growth target in a recession, and anybody who's listening and the recording didn't start won't know what that refers to. But that's the point, isn't it? We all talk about smart objectives and smart goals. Realistic is one of the most important parts of goal setting. The people that we're working with have to believe it's possible. So I think, how do you balance doing that? You do it in conjunction with the person that you're setting the targets with. You don't impose targets on people. You have constructive debate about how they're going to achieve them, so that they come out of that target setting meeting believing that, yeah, it's a stretch, yeah, it's ambitious, but I've got a route map. I know what I've got to do and how hard I've got to work, and I believe it's possible. Because if you don't believe it's possible, there's such a tendency to just switch off.
And I think you're so right, Heather, because realism is the word in that sentence that caught me. It's who's it realistic for? Are the owners of the business saying, well, it's realistic to expect 20% growth because the market's good and this and that, and we're doing this? But at the desk, the consultants say, well, actually, that's not what I'm hearing. And if you're not having that aligned conversation with your consultants, it's very difficult to convince somebody of a realistic target if they're not bought into it. And the stat that you gave at the beginning, Howard, was 12% of people don't believe they're ever going to hit their targets. Well, put that down to your bottom line. That's a huge number. If you've got 10 consultants and 1.2 of them, or one of them doesn't even believe they're going to hit their target, you're already behind them.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it sort of depends on who or what you're stretching. So if you're going to try stretch an individual, I think most of the individuals, if you look at that stat, I think what was the stat about the amount of people actually hitting target was something about
less than 84%.
Less than 84% are hitting target. So what you're saying is that you're going to try stretch somebody that's already going to get very, very demoralized because they're not hitting target, rather than someone that may be hitting target that you are more, motivating and stuff like that. So I think if you're going to put any sort of stretch target in, then that stretch target should be more around the team and actually motivating the team to hit a target, because then you can stretch a team a lot easier than you can stretch an individual, because that means that even if the individual is falling behind target, they still got a part to play in the team hitting their target. And I think there's that sort of a version to go. And I'll give you an idea of demotion. Let's go back to Adecco. I don't mean to demonize Adecco at all, but obviously that's my experience. And I'll use Lorien as well as a prime example. Every year we set targets for the annual winners trip. By January, probably 15 to 20% realize that they're not going to go on that trip. So you've got 15, 20% already demoralized. By the end of quarter one, that was up to 60%. By the end of quarter three, there was only 10% of the people that were still motivated in the business by that target. And everyone else was completely demoralized from it and didn't buy into it, etc. So I think if you're going to sort of set a stretch target, you set it as a team target. And I always work with clients, and I've done this with lots of my clients, and they've seen massive productivity from this, is that I set 3 stretch goals. So I set one that is between 5 and 10% below your target, one that's 105% above your target, and then a stretch target at 115% above. And the prize gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember doing this with a client during lockdown, just we came out of lockdown, and the initial prize for hitting 10% below was a barbecue in their car park. but the biggest prize at 115% was a weekend in London. going to the shows, etc., etc. Guess what? They smashed their target. Yeah, but it was that fun and it was a team environment, etc. And so I think you've got to start to think what you're trying to do. Are you trying to motivate the individual? And I think if you motivate the individual, you've got problems because lots of individuals miss their target. But if you motivate the team, then you get far bigger buy-in, because irrespective of whether people are behind or on target, they are motivated to help people drive beyond that team line. And I think that's where we start to have that disengagement between, recruitment owners trying to drive individual performance rather than trying to drive a team performance. And I think sometimes we seem to forget that, and we need to sort of think about how we pull that back together and from there.
So the other thing I've seen, Howard, for that end of year, big trip away thing is to have wild card prizes as well. So having, your targets that you've got to achieve to go on the trip, but also having a couple of kind of like chairman's award places. So for people who've, good reason why they've missed, new joiners to the business, who are showing the most promise, or, you've got to have those wild cards to keep people motivated with that. And that's worked really well for us.
Yeah. And I think another thing that, sorry, go on, Dave.
I was going to say, from a culture point of view, when we think of targets, let's include the whole company. So the salespeople will have their sales targets, and some of the finance people may have cash collection targets and things like that. But when you're talking about rewarding everybody end of year, all of that, your point, Heather, about having those buzz targets, those little pulse targets, it must include everybody. Everybody must have a chance to do something.
I tell you what, a bunch of highly successful recruitment consultants loved having the HR director go with them on their trips.
But I think there's a question there, or there's a comment there to be made, Dave, that says, depending on the size of your business, would you run it as a team target and take everybody away? But as your business gets larger, that becomes harder to do and more expensive to do, obviously. And then you section it out to what you're talking about, have individual sections and stuff like that, where people are achieving their target from there. What Adecco did was they limited it to the top 10. So, if you've got we had a division of 300, only 10 people are going to go on that trip. So instantly, you're absolutely, I could almost tell you on January the 1st, the top 5, because who the top 5 top billers were going to be, full stop, made no difference from there. And then we had little wild cards, but it still demoralized the majority of the business, and they just didn't care about it. So I think there's a big sort of view to work from there. So let's move on to sort of metrics then. So what metrics or data points do you find most effective in predicting growth and performance in recruitment? I was going to say, Dave, before you jump in, I'm going to throw this at Heather, and I'm going to throw this at Heather for a genuine reason. Okay.
Don't ask me about data points.
No, because you will end up, Heather, sweeping up those that are getting put into performance for not hitting those targets. So I think your understanding of this would be far more beneficial, because you're looking at it from the other way, where we're looking at it from how do you predict growth, how do you predict performance. You're beating it when they don't hit growth and don't hit performance. So what data points and metrics would you choose?
The problem with this, Howard, is it's so individual. Like, genuinely, the number of people who end up in formal performance management with HR is really small. So performance management is generally done informally by line managers. I promise you, the number of people who actually get to formal performance management, that HR involved. If you do, we've failed to do our job properly in HR. Our job is to address this before you ever get to sorry to sort of sidetrack the question, because I think it's really valid. But if you've got an HR department and you're doing loads of formal performance management, then HR haven't done the job properly, because their real job actually is helping managers to manage the performance of their teams without it ever needing to get to be some kind of formal performance. So I don't have a huge data set to say, well, this is what worked, because I was quite good at my job, and we really rarely used formal performance management. But sorry, to go back to the actual question, there are it's different for every single person, and it's very individual, and it tends to move away from the achievement of financial targets to what are the inputs. So we target people and we reward people on outputs, but when they're not hitting them, we have to go and look at, well, what are the inputs then? And that's going to be different based on the individual, where they are in their career, what their relationship is with their team, what their desk is like, what the economy is like. But so that would be the data point is you shift from outputs to inputs when you've got a problem.
Yeah, the inputs thing is so important because targeting is so individual. It's us as leaders that try to bunch it up together, like we were answering the point earlier on, by team or by sector or whatever, whereas actually it's individual. So some of the things I would want to see from my consultant, if you like, if I was having a one-to-one, is what information have you gathered to inform us as a company about what's going on in your market, about what's going on in your desk? Things like, how are you developing yourself? What are you reading? Where are you getting your information from? Another example, if you remember the REC, are you using the REC data that comes out every month, and it's a wealth of data, and it tells you about the growth of the market or the growth of your sector? So what information have you as a consultant got to sit down with me as a manager, if that's my role, and tell me about where the market's going, what you see about your desk? The more that you've got in the input stage, the better you can predict the output because you can see the trends. So I think if they're the sort of data points you need to have, then that's how I look at that.
So I think that's really interesting because I think Heather's right. You've got the usual suspects. If you're not getting the output, what input are you getting? What do you do from that point of view? But I think when you're starting to set targets and you're looking at how you're predicting growth and performance, I think the first thing I'd look at is my client base, and I'd look at my average customer life cycle. So I start to look at what my clients have built in the past and what they're like to build in the following year, and start to look at that. Now, if you're not close enough to your clients, that's a finger in the air exercise. But if you're close to your clients, you'll start to know which ones are going to be flatlining, which ones are going to be decreasing, which ones are going to grow. So you can start to look at from your average buying base, if you want growth, okay, what the gap is between my buying clients are going to give me this. That's the gap between the target I want. Therefore, that gap has to be new business. Now, let's look at what new business we brought in last year. What percentage was it? Did it was 5, 10, 15, 20%, whatever it be of our business? Does that then fill the gap or not? Or is the gap too wide? And so I always start to think, we tend to forget that we just expect, oh, well, that client billed £100,000 last year. They're going to bill £100,000 this year, which isn't the case. So sometimes we've got to get closer to our clients to understand what our customer life cycle looks like and then what our growth is. And then I start to look at what's the UK expected to grow by. So if the government are telling us that the UK economy is expected to grow by 2% this year, why am I expecting a 25% growth? The whole economy is only expected to grow by 2%, but we're expecting this. So you've got to start to think that there's a lot more intelligent people than us talking about what their expectations of the UK growth is. We should be having a look at that and looking what's going on. So I think we start to think about our targets in a different way. We know what outputs and inputs should be getting to get the performance that we need, but the economic environment around us is sometimes very different. And I think we've got to also think about our customer life cycle, and that life cycle will change every year. Let's not just expect growth on growth every year, because that is a real recipe for disaster. And like Dave, you held your hands up earlier. I'll hold my hands up. I was very, part of that. Right? They build £100,000 this year. Let's put them down as 120. They've built this, and you're putting clients down, and then next year they've built half of that. And you're trying to find that shortfall because we weren't close enough to the client base. So I think that me.
Can I just devil's advocate that for a moment? Where does targeting your business to take market share come from that? Because if you're only targeting your business to achieve what the UK economy is going to grow, and I get the argument, but just for a devil's advocate, is it valid to say we should be targeting to take market share? Because actually, we've all known recruitment businesses who've absolutely done that and outperformed the market.
So there is a point of that, but that goes back to that gap, isn't it? This is what our existing client buyers are going to do, and this is the new business gap. And taking market share is about growing your client base and taking new business. So if you don't understand what the gap is, and you just turn around and say to a consultant, right, okay, there you go, yeah, there's your target. We expect your client base will hit that target. And sometimes recruiters can hit their target just by their existing client base. So there's no growth. So I think you should be targeting on your existing client base to get close to your client base. What's that look like? If there's a gap in the target, then that's going to be covered by new business. But if you want to grow, then that's also going to be covered by new business as well. So I think there's two sides to that on how that works and what you've got to look at that. But we've got to get away from just saying, right, what Dave said earlier on, right, you're a senior consultant, therefore your target is this. You're a junior consultant, therefore your target is that. And your target growth every year will be 15, 20%. We've got to start to understand there are genuine metrics out there to measure what growth looks like. And, you know, if we're expecting 25% growth, but the UK is only expecting 2% growth, you know, there's a big difference there. But there's an opportunity in your marketplace to look at market share and say, right, if we have a real focus on new business, then let's look at that. Now, that might mean that we've got to recruit new people to do that. Now, we've already said what the stats are on new people coming into your business and what that looks like. That, you know, it takes them 90 days to get to start selling. It takes them, you know, a further 9 months before they become productive, and 15 months. So we're talking 2 years down the line before they get to that point. So we're trying to take market share where really our existing consultants should be looking at the market share. So what are we doing with our existing client base? Who's great at new business? Who's an account manager? And maybe that's about signifying or sectoring your business out into the right areas to get people doing the right jobs.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a whole nother webinar, isn't there, about that one, about business development, because we all know recruiters who just take the business they've got from their existing client base and just keep rolling and replacing. And getting paid out, rather than having that focus on taking market share and bringing in new business and bringing in new clients, or expanding in more depth into our existing clients. And so, yeah, I think it's a whole nother debate, isn't it?
And strangely, that's next week's webinar.
Yay!
Are your clients going to get you through 2025?
Yeah.
Or are you going to have a gap? And if you want growth, then you've got to look at your new business development, but you've also got to look at your existing client development as well. So that's a whole conversation next week that we'll park at the moment and stuff like that. But I think that's what we've got to start to think about. You've got to think about that way. So if you look at that, then sort of like what you were talking about then, Heather, let's throw this question then. How can recruitment leaders use historical data to set future targets, especially in a fluctuating job market?
And that's the bit how, for me, we have more data than ever before. So as recruitment leaders, there is data available to us on an individual basis, on a team basis, on the market. It's just about how you use it. I'll give you a good example. A company I was working with recently had just added LinkedIn Recruiter. They've not used that properly before, and a couple of other tech products. But what they didn't do was explain to their consultants exactly what they expected of them if they use this tool properly. Yeah, and instead of saying, okay, I've just spent £700 a head per desk a month on these new, and now we expect you to do this and this, and this is how you use it. Now that you'll gain market share if you do it properly, and you'll grow. Even if the market isn't growing, if you've got new tools and new techniques and to enable you to get data, to enable you to sell more people, to place more people, then that's a helpful way of helping a consultant see that whatever the market is, you can get a bit more because we've invested this in you. It is a two-way conversation. How many times as recruitment leaders have we invested in tools and techniques to help us grow our business that haven't really sold the benefit of that to consultants, or haven't really explained to consultants how they can get the best out of it? But then they look at it and put their arms up in the air and say, well, I've just spent another, £20,000 on these tools and I'm still not using it properly. I think there's a lot of information there that in a conversation, a recruitment leader can help just to help them set targets for delivering more.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I was thinking, I was reading the REC and ONS report on the job vacancies last week. So there are 841,000 job vacancies, and that's the 27th consecutive decrease in a row. Now, we know there's demand out there. And so when we start to look at historical data, I'm torn between looking at past performance, i.e., fill rate, CV to interview conversion rate, interview to placement ratios, and things like that to see what's going on. So there's a simple way that if you just improve your fill rate, then you will sell more from there. So it's looking at what the areas you can do. But I think it's tracking those trends within a business, looking at your past performance and say, right, okay, if our fill rate is 3 out of 10 jobs, if we just increase our fill rate and keep the job number the same and increase our job rate to 5 out of 10, then that massively increases performance and gives us automatic growth from there. And so historical data can give you that type of thing. But when you've got a fluctuating marketplace, I think it's also looking at your business as, where are your gaps in your business? Are you a temp business but isn't doing perm? Are you a perm business that isn't doing contract or temp? Are there gaps in your business that you could fill quite quickly and make growth, but that growth will last for a longer period of time than just the year that you're trying to do? And I think there's lots of companies out there that aren't looking at all sides of the coin. If you look at some of the companies that we've been working with this year that have taken from contingent to become retained. And again, they've been able to say, we're doing the same number of deals, but rather than doing an average of 15, 16, 17%, they're doing now an average of 20, 22, 23%. So they're doing the same deals, but they're just looking at different ways. So I think that you've got to start to look at your whole trends of your business, because irrespective of a fluctuating marketplace, there's opportunities to grow. There's opportunity to take market share. But if you are still flogging yourself at the same stats and not looking at how you improve the quality of your delivery, then you're missing an easy hack in how to grow your business.
And I think as well that the market's been so odd for the last few years that we can look at the downward trend at the moment and we can get tied up with, oh, woe is me, it's all a disaster, as opposed to there's still 800,000 vacancies. We can get into this mindset of a declining market, a declining economy, and we can, as you say, Howard, we miss the opportunities in our own business to improve fill rates, to look at our own productivity, to look at our own effectiveness.
But that's mindset, isn't it? Yeah, I think the mindset absolutely. There says, there was just before lockdown, the last registration number of jobs just before lockdown was I think it was either just below or just above 900,000. Yeah. So we're not a million miles away.
We're not far off, are we?
We're not far over. And was anyone complaining that was a bad market? No, it was a hardish market, but now it's like a super hard market because we had that great big, so we've got to get reality in some cases in what's going on, but we've also got to start to think that, our data says where we could be and where we should be. And I think the simple bits of data, such like, fill rate is an absolute primary one. If you're only filling 2 out of 10 jobs, then you've got a massive opportunity to grow your business just by improving your fill rate.
There's an interesting question, Howard. I don't know if you've seen it on. Have you seen the question that somebody's put on anonymously? So, how can you ensure that there is parity or equity amongst consultants and teams whilst catering to them as individuals?
So it's an interesting question, okay, because equity is a very sort of interesting sort of viewpoint. Okay, so what is equity and what you're trying to do? Now, obviously, someone with more skills should have a bigger slice of the pie of the team target. Okay, but parity then comes in, doesn't it? Because you might think, right, what's happening now? If I've got a really big skilled consultant and they are tied up with a large client, do I move that client out of the team target and into an individual target for that person, or move them part of the team? There's so many different ways that you can answer that question. It's going to be a really hard answer to question. But if you've got, say, like a team of 10 and your business is going to do, let's, for simple maths, £1 million, so everyone's got a 100k target, okay, then there's parity and equity. But I know for a fact that someone's going to do 50, someone's going to go 200, someone's going to do 220, someone's going to go 75 based on their skill rate. So I think you've got to sort of look at targets. I think targeting individuals by their, I suppose, by their title is wrong. We should be targeting individual by their performance year in, year out, and by their capability and capacity. But then we should be looking at
their market.
Yeah. And then we should be looking at what their market's like, what their client base is like, and then what they need to do. So I could look at one of my consultants that was billing on average 20 grand a week, huge client, but out of one client. And so we moved him out of the business target because it was a threat to the business target, and we targeted him on reducing that, etc. And how we did. I had another consultant billing a similar amount, but out of 40 clients. So we expected her to grow, but she kept within the team target. So you've got to start to think about horses for courses and what's the right thing to do and what's the wrong thing to do, because he eventually lost that client and lost it to our corporate division rather than lost it to anybody else. And so it went from our division to a corporate division, and from there, and he ended up moving a lot across to the corporate division. So all of a sudden you've got to start to think that there's no parity there, that he's going to smash his target based off one client, but he's also got a bigger problem.
Yeah, and I think that's what I love what you're saying. There is a real difference between treating everybody the same and treating everybody fairly, and it's about transparency and closeness to the individual circumstances, desk development, context, exactly things like that. That how it links to the overall business goals and targets. So I think it's not about treating everybody the same. It's treating everybody with fairness and transparency based on their context.
Yeah.
Well, so
that's the equity bit for me, Heather.
Yeah.
That's the bit, the fairness, the equity comes from treating everybody the same, so that everybody feels whatever their target is, they've got there the same way.
Yeah.
So I'll give another version of this, which is a quite sort of a different view. Okay. So as a martial artist, as a black belt, I sit on panels to grade other martial artists up the line to eventually get to compete for their black belt. Okay. And there are guys that are uber talented, and then there are people who are as good as they were ever going to get. And that's the question. Do we put the person who's good as they're ever going to get in for their black belt? And yes, we do. Why? Because that's as good as they're ever going to get. And it's about improving them and getting them to a point where they feel that they are comfortable and competent at what they do. And therefore, the competency says that you deserve that grade from there. So you've got lots of people in your business that might be competent at hitting 150K every single year, year in, year out. But every year you're trying to grow them by 20%. And every year they miss target, and it's not nice. It's not a great feeling for them, because we haven't understood that that's as good as they're ever going to get. Where you've got other people who you can stretch and stretch and stretch and grow and develop, but they'll get to a point where they're going to be as good as they're ever going to get. And that's the bit you've got to start to think about, how you treat your people. So if you treat everybody the same and try grow everybody, then some people are going to fall by the wayside, but they could be really good, steady away billers, but we're always trying to stretch them, and that puts them under pressure, makes them leave, they go somewhere else, they bill well for somebody else, and carry on from that way. So I think you've got to treat people individually on their capability and capacity, not just you're this level and therefore I'm expecting this much and therefore we're going to put this target on you.
Completely agree.
Okay. So, question. In your experience then, what strategies work best for keeping teams motivated and focused on exceeding business targets?
I would never forget to over communicate about where each individual fits into the bigger picture. Yeah, so we will have a goal for the year, and we'll have a company goal, and we'll have this is what we want to deliver. Where do I as a consultant fit into that? And keep reminding them of that, keep communicating them, have them up on the feet to say what they're doing about their part of that. I think it's the bit that sometimes we lose out on, the fact of not reminding people that they're a vital cog in helping the company grow in whatever role, in whatever capacity they work for us. Yeah, whether they're in serving in the finance team or the marketing team or the HR team, or they're in the sales team. And the other thing I think works is having little pulse targets. You mentioned earlier, Heather, about little incentives. Hey, tell you what, if we do this week, we're all going out for dinner. If we do this month, this is what we're going to have. Those little measures, I think, build culture, they build strength, and they build encouragement. And that's how you help to hit that target.
Yeah, and I think the key word for me in that, Dave, is culture. So it's
Yeah.
having the whole culture focused on success, performance, debate, discussion, development, and not forgetting development. So making the exceeding business targets really personal, making it part of their individual development, making them feel valued as individuals on their own development journey in their career, as well as that being part of the organization. So it's all about the culture of linking individuals' development and career to business objectives and business ambitions.
What's the old saying? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go as a team.
Yeah.
So I think you've got to sort of create the environment where your individuals can perform inside that individual environment, but the team environment is the strongest pull, and that's back to your culture from there. And I think what Dave's saying is about having mini targets, why do we break our yearly target down into months, quarters, etc., etc.? Because it's easy to achieve. And I think it's that communication, and it's the praise, it's the development, etc., that drives people, and it's about focusing on what people are doing. And I think it's there. And so I think as a team, it's about creating the environment where everyone can, blossom within that team environment. And to me, that's where winning's done. There's very few really hard individual sports which are true individual sports. Even if you look at, say, boxing as an individual sport, it's not. There are so many people sat behind that boxer making that boxer get to where he is today, that makes it almost a team sport, with just one person spearheading the winning and losing of that team sport. But everyone has a cog to play in it. And then there's genuine true team sports where you see that, if an individual's a poor individual, one bad apple, etc., can really just, derail a team. And therefore I think, to keep a team motivated, it's all about culture. It's all about the right behaviors and the balance of the behaviors from there. So I've got two quick questions, and this is because the last question is I think is important to ask. What role does then team input play in setting targets, and how can leaders create buy-in for a more ambitious goals?
Well, I think it's a fairly simple and obvious answer. Nobody wants a target that's given to them without any input. They want to feel involved. So I think team input is absolutely vital. So individual input, team input, the more people you can have that are qualified to get involved in the discussion about what the target should look like, the better, because then you get that buy-in. So not to involve the team and only to administer targets from the top, I think is a recipe for less success than if you did it properly.
Yeah, communicate. Yeah. So I think I'm trying to do a quick answer for you, Howard.
So. No. So it's right, because I looked at that from our Adecco point of view, where we were given the targets at the top and we had to go out. So then we'd go to the bottom and say, right, we want you to come back and tell us what you think you're going to build this year. And we look at a bottom up, top down target. And quite often the bottom up would over exceed what we were expecting. So you could start to lower their targets and try hit our expectations, but sometimes you had some people who were miles away, and you start to think, right, okay, what's happening there? And investigation. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they were wrong. But I think that bottom up, top down, and as Dave says, that input, no one wants a target where they don't feel they've had an input into the target, because they feel, cheated in a way. Both whether it's over or under what their expectations were from there. So last question, which I think is the real crux of this, and a lot of people ask this question: how do you adjust business targets when facing unexpected market shifts or external challenges?
That is almost a whole webinar in itself. But my answer is early, Howard. Adjust them early to get buy-in, because you get paid the big bucks if you're running a recruitment company, because there's other things that you can do that the consultants can't do. The consultants are skilled at relationship building and selling and placing people, but there are other things you could do. You may have to reduce your costs. So that may be a tech answer. That may be some people, sadly, will lose their jobs. There's things that you could do as a leader, but whatever you do it swiftly, do it early, and communicate it well so that it doesn't have a demoralizing effect. COVID is a great example. Some companies really navigated that whole change so well, others less well. That's a very really short answer, but there's almost a book to be written on this.
There is.
I'm going to go ditto. It's an excellent answer, Dave. Ditto.
Because even though I wrote the question, I found it a really hard question to answer because my instant gut feeling is no, you do never adjust your target. But what you do is you look at your strategy and your execution to see whether you can close the gap from where you are to hitting your target. And that was always my gut reaction was no, we've got a financial target. We never change it, but we change how we approach hitting that target and looking at that. Because I think sometimes as an owner or a leader, if you lower a target, does that make you look weak? However, there are certain, like COVID, etc., there are certain circumstances where actually it's the right thing to do, but I think involving your team, listening to them, etc., taking dual accountability for those type of things is where we should be looking at. But I've got that guttural fall of never adjust your target, but adjust your strategy and adjust your execution to try shorten the shortfall that you've got if you have unexpected changes or market shifts. There are certain market shifts, though, as you said, Dave, like Brexit. Well, I suppose Brexit was one, like COVID, that would, absolutely you need to do something and change something from there. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Heather, Dave, thanks very much. I'm very sorry, but the recording, for some reason, I don't know absolutely what happened. The recording didn't start recording until about the first 10 minutes, so they're going to miss all the stats. Happy, most people will be saying from there.
No, we love your stats, Howard.
We'll have
we
to write something in there. But next week, as I said, we are looking at, are your clients going to help you grow and build in 2025? Let's test our client relationships. And I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation because that, I think, links back to target setting on what you think your client base is going to do. And it'll give you a pure and certain indication of how much new business you need to create next year in order to hit your targets. So, ladies and gents, thanks very much. Good to see you both, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks very much.
Bye.
Thanks, Heather. Have a good week, everybody.